Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is January 30, year 2022, and it is 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I'm joined or rejoined with author Kirby Sommers today. And she, as most of you know by now, is the acclaimed author of several books. Let me just hold up a few of them. She's the author of numerous books by now, and the list is growing. This is the first book that I read of hers. It's called The Billionaire's Woman. I don't know if it's still in print. We'll find out from Kirby Sommers soon about the availability of these incredible books. And then there is the Ghislaine Maxwell biography, the critical biography. And as we will find out shortly, if you think you know everything about the Jeffrey Epstein case, think again and hang on to your seats. Here's an incredible book that you can start on, though. It's Jeffrey Epstein, Predator, Spy. And I'm sure I'll chime in occasionally, but I'm going to please, as a courtesy to Kirby Sommers, just let her roll with it. But I'm very much interested in the Montauk Project. I've been reading about it for years, especially the work of Peter Moon and his co-author, Preston Nichols. And Kirby Sommers is going to be talking about the Philadelphia experiment shortly. And I also want to get her perceptions about the geopolitical, let's say the gravitational focus where a lot of this is taking place. And that is the Caribbean, right? That's where Little Bart Island is, where Jeffrey Epstein or his people had their little private redoubt. And I got clued into this after starting from scratch, from book one, Casino Royale, the entire work, the fiction of one Ian Fleming. And one recurrent pattern is that the Bahamas, that is the Caribbean, is the center of action. And that was borne out in 2016 with the drop of the so-called Panama Papers. So I'm hoping that Kirby Sommers today will help add a new analytical depth, a greater degree of analytical depth to this story, this empire that's threatening to enclose our entire world. So with that, let me welcome Ms. Kirby Sommers. Ms. Sommers, welcome.
Thank you so much, Daryl, for that incredible introduction. I have been really very happy that we connected through our followers who, by the way, seem to have joined forces. My followers are now your followers are my followers. Yeah, the information about Jeffrey Epstein continues to grow, mainly because, as you point out, I was a former sex slave to one of the people involved in, frankly, not just the Jeffrey Epstein case, but also, if you recall, the Franklin child abuse case. Does that ring a bell?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay, and so one of the things that I want to preface our conversation today with is that the government went through a very big pushback with the Franklin child abuse case, so much so that if you look on Wikipedia, it says that it was an elaborate hoax. And so for anyone who's listening, who's not familiar with the Franklin child abuse scandal, it came to surface during the 1980s at the time that Ronald Reagan was in office. And it was a child trafficking ring, very similar to the Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell case. I became interested in the Franklin child abuse case because I had listened to one of the let me just, I just have like 40 pages of notes today. So bear with me, because last time I think I only had 26, but today I have about 40 pages of notes. So I had listened to the deposition of Paul Bonacci, who was one of the three very well-known victims of the Franklin child abuse case. And as I said, it was connected to Ronald Reagan's White House. It was exposed during the 1980s. And he said that he was part of a government program known as the MK Ultra program. And that, and frankly, during his deposition, which someone filmed and it was on YouTube, I don't know if it's still on YouTube. It was a very long, I believe, 3-hour thing that would be taken down from YouTube. And he looks really, really worn. His eyes are, deeply circled. During this time when they were questioning him and trying to find the name of the person that was his handler, you could see in this videotaped sort of deposition that he was very reluctant. He didn't want to give the name, but finally he did give the name. And that name was a man named Gary Ackerman. Gary Ackerman is a former congressman, and Gary Ackerman happens to be the ex-husband of Ira Rickless's sister, Mona. Gary Ackerman was a New York City congressman who used to wear a flower, a carnation, in his lapel. And he had been accused by other male adult victims of having had inappropriate relationships with them. So I heard this years ago, and because I heard the name Gary Ackerman and my relationship via Ira Rickless, I thought this case, the Franklin scandal, stayed, on my mind. I wasn't actively looking into it, but then when the Epstein thing surfaced, and I knew that Epstein was related to Wexner, related to Israel through Sharon, and it was like, okay, let me just put a pin in this. However, the government, I want to just again state that the government forcefully tried to deny that the Franklin child abuse scandal, which had its roots in a place called Boys Town, which was made famous in old movies. Mickey Rooney, and you're a movie buff, so Mickey
Yes.
Rooney, in that old movie Boys Town with Father Flanagan, that is the place where they would get the children from and then fly them to Washington, D.C., to these parties where they would be forced to participate in, illegal things with some of these very powerful politicians. So that the government has time and time again attempted to call something a hoax, when in fact, it's not a hoax, it's just a cover up. So one of the things that I'm going to be sharing today is about a place called Camp Hero. The government still calls Camp Hero a hoax, but I'll tell you what Camp Hero is, where it is, and what it was. Camp Hero was a military base that was sort of built in the 1920s in New York City on the easternmost part of Long Island, in a place that we now know as Montauk. And it was such a covert military operation in the 1920s that they built a fake fishing village, fake buildings. I mean, there were some people living there, but not a lot. It was not the resort town that it is today. Today, people go and stay there, for the summer and all sorts of things. But it was a military base from the 1920s until 1983. And then it went through, I believe, 2 incarnations. The first was Camp Hero, again, a fake fishing village by the government for experiments and all sorts of things. And the other one then led to what you just discussed, the Montauk Project and the Philadelphia experiment. I'm going to discuss and go into detail as I go through this information, some of the following phrases. Let me just share them with you. So I'm going to be discussing Operation Paperclip, which many of your wonderful followers are really wise to. I've discussed the Franklin child abuse, so that's done. A program by the name of Family Jewels, which led to the church committee hearings, which I believe some of your followers also know about. I'll be discussing very well-known Pulitzer Prize investigative journalist, Seymour Hersh. And then, briefly touching on the Philadelphia experiment. Talking about the Montauk Project, which was held on what used to be Camp Hero. The MK Ultra program, as I just said, Paul Bonacci said he was an MK Ultra victim. And I want to say that for those of you who have read Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy, first of all, thank you so much for having read the book. Because in Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy, I gave you some clues. I said that one of Jeffrey Epstein's friends, his name is Stuart Pivar. And also this is something that you can find in a Mother Jones article that came out when Jeffrey Epstein was initially arrested in July of 2019, so almost 3 years now. So Stuart Pivar was a very close friend of Jeffrey Epstein. He is in the art world. He was friends, Stuart Pivar, with Andy Warhol. And just as a background information, Stuart Pivar and Andy Warhol opened up the New York Academy of Arts School, which one of the women who is described as a victim, Maria Farmer, attended. So he told Stuart Pivar that he studied math with the Unabomber as a kid. The Unabomber is a man by the name of Ted Kaczynski, who in fact, this is again verifiable information. He went to Harvard, and during the 3 years he was at Harvard, he took part in one of the CIA's covert programs, MK Ultra. The students, Ted Kaczynski among them, did not know it was MK Ultra, and he was paid. I believe the kids were all paid like maybe $8-10 an hour. They were put behind this two-way mirror. They were treated in a way that was very belittling to test their boundaries, right? To see where they would break. But this is part of our historical record. So this is something that can be checked into. The government has not been able to say that it was not. He was not.
For the audience, excuse me, Kirby, there's a citation, Alston Chase, Harvard and the Making of the Unabomber. That's the definitive book on that. So what Kirby Sommers is saying here has been well documented. Continue.
Okay, so Jeffrey Epstein said that he had been a student of Ted Kaczynski, who again connected to the MK Ultra program as a kid. And today I'm going to share that I believe, and I have always believed, that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell are part of the MK Ultra program. And I just want to say that MK Ultra, I use that as a broad term because even when it began in 1945, in earnest in the United States, with the German scientists that were brought into the United States in the operation known as Operation Paperclip. And these are the same scientists. You know, it's a shame to call them scientists when in reality they were butchers, and they were people who were experimenting on children and killing um, Jewish people and putting them in gas chambers. But that's really what are the reading material that we've been provided in the United States. That's what they refer to them as. So, you know, for me, I find it offensive to call them scientists. But that's what, you know, the official word is. So I'm going to continue to use that. And, you know, just to understand that for me, I find it offensive. Um, so these scientists were brought into the United States because of their knowledge of the mind control techniques. The United States was of the belief that if they learned how to control somebody's thought patterns, their behavior, modify behavior through the use of drugs, that they could essentially then beat any military opponent. And so they invested quite heavily into these programs, and they brought over, on the record, it says it was 1,600 scientists, but frankly, the number is much higher. And it began, frankly, before 1945, before the war. It began in the late 1930s. And just as a sort of an aside, like a bonus, because I know the information and we're talking about it, so why not say it? The way they were brought over, initially it was not covert. You know, they would just find these scientists with knowledge about mind control, and they were shuffled over into the United States, literally here to the New York pier, where they were picked up by usually the chauffeur of a well-known, very wealthy family. So one of these families, one of your friends, you just had him on your show, Manny Grossman.
Yes.
Okay, so a family like Untermeyer, is that the right?
Yes, Untermeyer, as in
Okay, so
Untermeyer Park. Louis Untermeyer, the
yes.
prominent attorney.
So the prominent attorney and others of his ilk who were, some of them were German through and through, some of them were German who then during the war said that they were Jewish, right? So they would come into the United States, but they were wealthy. They had a lot of money. And so these Nazi scientists that were brought in, let's say before the war, and even after the war, they would end up going into the homes of these very wealthy, prominent men who had homes, let's say in upstate New York, places where they would not, you know, they were not necessarily part of, let's say, a busy city like New York City. And they would be given 6 months to sort of recuperate. And during the war, they would be given a facelift. Their appearance would be altered. In some cases, their name would be changed. And then from there, they would go into Harvard or into the NASA program or into a place like the Montauk Project, or, you know, and the Philadelphia experiment. So I'm just going to stop here and see if you have a question, because I don't want to just.
Yeah, well, in my own independent investigations, I've been coming across some connections between the George Eastman, the founder of Kodak, right, upstate in
Yes.
Rochester. He endowed Rochester Institute of Technology. And I know that you and your research have uncovered the connection between certain prominent philanthropists and MIT. So before the MIT,
Yes.
it was RIT with George Eastman. And as part of your world, you know about surveillance, photography, videography as for intelligence as well as for compromise operations. I think this is a research thread that needs to be explored, especially since at the very inception of modern photography, voyeurism, surveillance, and paraphilias were integral to the art and science of photography, as well as spiritualism, as in spirit photography. So there's all these multiple layers where the metaphysical, the occult intersect with the physical, the physics, and the material, the scientific. Anyway, please continue.
Agreed. Um, some of your audience might be familiar with a Netflix series called Stranger Things. Stranger Things is a very popular show on Netflix. It began in 2016. It premiered specifically on July 15, 2016. It's set in the 1980s in the fictional town of Hawkins, Indiana. And the first season focuses on the investigation into the disappearance of a young boy. And it's got all sorts of supernatural events around this small town, including the appearance of a girl with, you know, these abilities that would be beyond the normal, so paranormal activities. It is in fact a show about MK Ultra, and it exposes. It is based on what happened in Montauk, New York, in commencing in 1974 and ending in 1983. And that was called the Montauk Project. Well, while I was researching, I literally, because I knew that this was based on MK Ultra, I started to watch a couple of the what do you call this, the series, because I thought, well, gee, that's interesting. And then what do I discover? In one of the shows, and I think I sent you a photograph, the children, all of these are MK Ultra children, and each one has a different ability. So one of them can move things with just their brain, right? They can utilize their brain to move a large object, and all of these things were things that were studied in the actual MK Ultra program. And like I said earlier, I use MK Ultra as an umbrella term because there are hundreds of sub programs in this one program, which in fact was part of a congressional investigation, and again can be verified with CIA documents and legal documents. If you go back and do your due diligence, this is not something that is just part of a Netflix series, but this is part of our history that you're not taught in school because these were covert programs. So while I was watching this to do my research, the children in one of the series, in one of the episodes, walk into a laboratory, and they start rummaging through it. And on the wall are photographs of a bunch of different people. And one of those photographs was Ghislaine Maxwell. Did you see the one that I sent you of Ghislaine
Yes,
on the
I
wall?
did. I was bowled over by that. I didn't want to say anything because, yeah, quite
Well,
incredible. Not an accident.
not an accident. And I think that what we have seen, and what seems to be very, very clear, is that the other side, let's call them the intelligence community because that's what it is, flaunts it before our very eyes, right? So the term, one of my followers is really very fast, so she's read everything that I've written. So, and one of the things that I write about is the movie by Stanley Kubrick, Eyes Wide Shut. So when I said, they put things in front of our eyes, but most people don't see it. And then she wrote Eyes Wide Shut, right? Because they put it out there. It's an illusion. It's magic, which is why they use all of these magicians like David Copperfield and all of them in intelligence forever, since the beginning.
Uri Geller.
Uri Geller, who, by the way, Uri Geller is another one that can be verified as having been a CIA person to help. What he did on, let's say, the Johnny Carson show with the moving of the spoon, some of that was fake because he could do much more than that. Oh, yeah. I mean, the whole thing of you can create with your mind and like literally what's happening in this television show that's supposed to be fictional was what was really happening in the Montauk Project, and frankly in a project that began before that. So yeah, so the Ghislaine Maxwell photograph on the wall of this MK Ultra Netflix series, I thought, well, gee, well, no, it's not a mistake. It's put there, and only, I believe, someone like myself or you, Daryl, would pick that up, right? I mean, it's like, wait a minute, right in front of our eyes. So I said something on your show the last time I was invited, and I can't thank you enough for inviting me again, because this information is brand new and I didn't really want to debut it anywhere else but with you, including I didn't put it on my YouTube. I shared it with the people who are subscribers to my newsletter, but I knew that if I debuted this, it would only be with you because you would understand it.
Oh, yes.
So what I said the very first time that I was on your show was that a person that had not received any investigation seemed to me to be Jeffrey Epstein's father, Seymour Epstein. And I thought it was very unusual that mainstream media has not done a deep dive into who Seymour Epstein was. And so I decided, well, we know mainstream media is an arm of the intelligence agencies, as Sig Mickelson told us in the church committee hearings. So I decided to do it for them and for us. So we know that he worked for the New York City Parks Department. Well, who was the landlord for the Montauk Project at the easternmost tip of Long Island but the New York City Parks Department? The New York City Parks Department was actually the landlord and the owner of the place where Camp Hero was located, where basically where the Philadelphia experiment, I'm going to explain that in a moment, and the Montauk Project interconnected. So to take a step back, the Philadelphia experiment, again, like the Franklin scandal, there is a big pushback. The government claims it's a hoax. So the Philadelphia experiment happened in 1943. It was an experiment conducted by the United States Navy in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. They used a US Navy destroyer called the USS Eldridge, and they actually created the ability to sort of make the ship invisible. However, during their tests of making the ship invisible, they ran into a little problem. And the problem was that they discovered while the ship disappeared, and this was after a lot of tests. So I'm not saying that they did it the first time and the ship disappeared, but the ship disappeared during one of the tests that was eventually A, successful, and B, very unsuccessful. And I'll explain why it was unsuccessful very soon. It disappeared. They couldn't see it. And then suddenly it reappeared. Well, what happened was when they went into the ship to find out what happened, the ship, I believe there were like approximately, maybe a couple more, a couple less, 30 men on board, because when they were experimenting with the ship and trying to make it invisible to the enemy, first they were doing it without the Navy guys on board. But then when they knew that they would have to experiment with some of their personnel, and so they had about 30 of them, half of them were, sort of like, I don't really know ship terminology, so let's say on the deck, right? And some of them were beneath the deck. So that when the ship came back into visibility and the men, the people who were doing this experiment went on to check, what they found was a scene from a horror movie. They saw some of the men wandering around like they were crazy, disappearing, reappearing. Some of them were stuck in walls, in like these metal walls, so that, and there's a photograph that I sent you. Did you receive that? Did you take a look at that?
Yes, absolutely.
What are your feelings about that photo? That's a very eerie photo, and that I got from somebody who actually is an eyewitness, and I also explain how he's an eyewitness in a minute. But what was your feeling on that? Do you have it? You want to show the audience?
Well, I don't have it queued up here, but it took me back to this classic film by one and only Roman Polanski, and it's a film starring the beautiful Catherine Deneuve, and it was called Repulsion in English. And it shows these hands and these faces and other body parts that are coming out of a wall. And this is emblematic of her psychotic breakdown. But after seeing that, I think, and this isn't, of course, consistent with who Roman Polanski is so far as being part of a larger intelligence network. We know about Rosemary's Baby, but not very many people know about his full contribution to cinema history. I think Roman Polanski was involved in somehow in just like whether it's on the periphery or central to it, just like Stanley Kubrick was involved as well. Because again, remember photography, George Eastman,
Yeah.
cinematography, holography, it's all involved in this operation there. So that's what it brought to me. It's kind of
Yeah,
a
I mean,
strange connection.
that photo with the men stuck in the wall, you can see that one of the guys' faces, one of the arms. They were only able to save one of the, I think there were like 5 men who got stuck inside the walls, and they became, on a molecular level, they became part of this wall.
Right.
So they were able to amputate the arm of one of these soldiers and save him. The others that were walking around aimlessly as if they were crazy, they were quietly slipped off into an insane asylum because they had literally, their brain had been scrambled so that they were literally, they became insane. But to your point about the movies that we see by the people that we who have produced them, like Polanski with Rosemary's Baby, and I'll even say Woody Allen, which I wasn't going to discuss, but I'll even say Woody Allen, based on your, I think you've done 2 talks on Mia Farrow and Woody Allen, and I have been watching all of your wonderful presentations diligently. I don't miss one.
Thank you.
Because now I think I'm your number 1 fan.
Could you talk a little bit about the Pharaoh Bloodlines? Did you want to?
um,
Or should we save that for later?
well, I mean, there's just so much information to cover, but I do want to say that you're onto something, so that when you saw the Polanski use of some of these things that are known only to people who have inside information about covert government programs used in a film, it does signify that they are part of this intelligence covert operation. So for example, Woody Allen's film what is it called? Is it Midnight in Paris? One where the guy time travels back into uh, the 1920s, and he meets Ernest Hemingway. What is that name
That's
of that film?
Zelig, isn't it? Zelig?
Yes. No, I mean, it's a film that is put out just not too long ago.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that one. But yeah, time travel. Also, The Strange Life or The Curious Life of Benjamin Button. Remember the
Well, yeah,
regression?
yeah. So,
Yeah.
and by the way, about before I talk about what he did in that film, which again is connected to the MK Ultra program, I will say that when he was writing the very well-known film Manhattan, which he was writing in 1974 and 1975, guess where he was doing that? He was doing that at Dalton High School, which
Oh,
is and this is a bonus because I wasn't planning to talk about this, but since we're on the subject, why not indulge and let's just put it all out there. So that and we have seen photographs of Jeffrey Epstein and Woody Allen and Sunyi, right? These, you can Google them, they're out there. They had a very close relationship. Uh, and the film was released in, I believe, 19 in the, like 1978 or something like that. And the star was Mariel Hemingway and then he uses Hemingway in this other film about time travel. Um, and so I believe, based on uh, just information that I've seen through his films and his close-knit friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, because he would go to his house all the time, that he too had some kind of inside knowledge, uh, just like I think you were able to point out with the other guy, right? Do you agree?
with Ronan Farrow?
No, with
Oh, Roman
Polanski.
Polanski. Well,
Because
others as well.
yeah, and
Mm.
well, obviously,
Oh, F.
um,
Scott Fitzgerald, The Curious Life of Benjamin Button. That's a F. Scott Fitzgerald short story. And he's a dropout from Princeton. And as you know, most of these refugees, that's one of the first places they touched down. And I think they were doing this type of work even when F. Scott Fitzgerald was kind of wandering around there fresh from the Midwest, trying to figure out what the power elite is all about.
right. And so I want to explain how the
Oh,
schools come into this.
okay,
How
before
the
we go on,
Yeah,
since it's fresh in my mind, and this is to your point about
yes, of
the
course.
story, the Stranger Things, how this is embedded in the popular culture. Most
Yep.
of your audience and my audience already know this, but for those who are relatively new to the topic, there were three major figures of modern science fiction that were present at what's now called the Philadelphia experiment. The most prominent of which is one Isaac Asimov, and he was a professor for most of his career when he was, well, not most of, for much of his career. And then also
Hmm.
Robert Heinlein was there. People who read SF will know about Robert Heinlein, Stranger in a Strange Land. These are all about interdimensional travel, time travel, what's known as quantum physics today, time travel. And the third person, Ms. Sommers, was none other than the founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, all
Hmm.
involved. And there's a
Why is that
photo of them
not?
all
Yeah.
all three of them together.
Why is that not surprising? But it's interesting how we're able now to start connecting these dots that in the beginning it seemed like these were unrelated, and that these were standalone anomalies, right? But suddenly they're becoming part of one picture, one, it's all government connected.
Well, this is
I
thanks to writing like yours. It didn't
Thank
really
you.
happen at random. I mean, you lived it, number one, and then because of your writing intelligence, your writer's observational powers, you were able to synthesize it. And your work is helping us to save and to recover the republic, the American republic, as well as the world. I'll say globally. This is a new world order we're grappling with. Thank you, Kirby Sommers.
Well, it's a lot of work. I research all the time. I don't take a day off. I've been sick for approximately 8 weeks now, but I'm still working. And I've turned the corner. I know that we had scheduled our chat for last week, and I apologize. I just have not been feeling very well. But this is important because if we don't do it, no one else is going to do this for us. And yeah, I had an insight. So that the information that I was able to, I spent 8 years as Ira Rickless's sex slave. Although I'm going to say that I have been under, I you nailed it. Even before you and I met, when you talked about having found my book, The Billionaire's Woman, and you're one of the few who understood that I was surveilled um, before he and I began, yes, this odd thing where he would not leave me alone. I had a boyfriend at the time. He made it so that my boyfriend and I would break up, and he was just very, very insistent. And it was 8 years of, and like, it was just to the point where he would call me. He was overly obsessed with me. Even he didn't take no for an answer. Who called me 20 to 40 times a day, so that to present day, and that happened in the 1980s. It began in 1986. I was able to finally break away in 1993. Um, to present day, the sound of a phone ringing takes me right back to him calling me repeatedly. But during those 8 years, I heard things that didn't make sense to me. He would talk about strange things like UFOs or odd experiments. And his sisters were psychiatrists. His wife was a psychiatrist. He would often get me on the phone, no matter where I was. Oh, I need for you to take this test. And it would be a questions based on some kind of psychiatric thing. And he needed to know my bloodline. And I'm Rh negative. And when like what I remember
Wait a minute,
about,
Ms. Sommers, you said you're Rh negative?
yeah.
Oh my God, that's another discussion. Please continue.
Well, it apparently was very interesting to him as well, because what I want to say is there are a couple of the English language, all language evolves with us, so that there are words that we no longer use that were part of the English vernacular, if you will, of our everyday use, and then they're replaced with new words. So prior to ever meeting Ira Rickless, I was date raped. And this happened in the 1980s again. But in the 1980s, the term date rape did not exist. I don't even know when that became an official term, but I know that it didn't exist back then because I didn't know how to describe it when it happened to me, and my life changed forever. When I became a sex slave, I knew that I was not his girlfriend because I didn't feel like I was not in love with him. I had already been in love with somebody else. I had been his girlfriend, right? I knew what the difference was. I had already been sexually trafficked. And so I knew that I had been coerced into this and trapped, and I didn't know how to get out of this strange thing. And so that I did start calling it by the mid 2000s or early 2000s. I did start calling it sex slave. However, I have been heavily trolled, I believe, because I am exposing this. We're no longer at the tip of the iceberg, I think. We are now under the surface. I have been heavily trolled, not just since 1993 when I left him, by various government connected individuals who I have identified as, being connected to the CIA, to the State Department. They have stayed with me through years, but I have been heavily trolled on Twitter and in a way that if I had not had my experience of having been trolled in life, the way that Ronan Farrow wrote about Rose McGowan, all of these fake people have been in my life for decades. So that if I didn't have that experience that Ronan, and I urge everyone, if you don't want to read his book and spend the money on buying it, although I do suggest you read his book, you can read the wonderful article that he wrote for free on the New Yorker. You can find it. It's called, it's about Harvey Weinstein, something about spies. If you put that into a search engine with the New Yorker and Harvey Weinstein, and it's called Army of Spies. And
Yes.
he wrote that in, I believe it was 2018 or something like that, October of 2018. And that is what sort of got the Me Too movement going. And then he wrote his book about that. But if I had not been aware of, and in fact, I contacted him and shared with him information that I thought would help him, because Ehud Barak came up, David Boies, who oddly has become Virginia Giuffre's attorney. All of this is, it's all connected to the same thing. But to my point, if I had not become stronger and wiser and known what these people do, it's government controlled opposition to discredit a person who is telling the world what they want to keep secret. I would have stopped, right? But because I know what this is about, there's no stopping me. I know that I'm on to something that we should all know, because we all live on this planet, and we cannot accept what they want, which is ultimately what they want is the master slave mentality forever. We're supposed to be reduced to nothing, right? And they're supposed to stay in control. So we're not, if we do have to do the work ourselves, that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. The schools were, so for example, MIT, Columbia, Harvard, Wharton, the University of Pennsylvania, and I think two others were part of, they were sort of the umbrella over the MK Ultra program that was handled through the CIA and other government agencies like the Navy, the Air Force, even the FBI, and that was then decimated throughout the United States. In 1973, a report, a 693-page report on the misdeeds of the CIA called Family Jewels, during the time that President Richard Nixon was in office. And just as a reminder, he was in office from 1969 through 1974. And he is the president who is the only president that really was going to be yanked out and possibly, very possibly put into jail. He's known primarily for what everybody remembers as Watergate. And however, this report, Family Jewels, was exposing a lot of the covert programs that were taking place in Richard Nixon's White House via the CIA, and one of which was MK Ultra. Another one was the spying of regular citizens, opening of our mail, what they had done, let's say, for example, to Martin Luther King, false, fake phone calls, fake letters to mess with his mind, right? Which ultimately resulted in, sadly, his assassination. So that this 693-page report on many of the misdeeds in Nixon's White House seeked out to none other than Seymour Hersh. Seymour Hersh, wonderful Pulitzer Prize investigative journalist who had already researched Vietnam and the My Lai massacre and other atrocities, again, committed by the CIA. It got to him, and it got to him, and he started to write an article that can be read. And at some point, I'll let you know where your audience can find this information on my website. He started to write an article for the New York Times, because although the New York Times is, again, still an arm of the government, more so now than it was before, there were periods where somebody like Seymour Hersh, who had a relationship with them and who was widely respected, could still get information out to the public. In some cases, these articles that would be written would be retracted, right? So that there are articles that would be written about some program or other that we can't find today because they were removed. But somebody like Seymour Hersh in 1974 said, okay, well, he began to write about it. And what happened was, when Seymour Hersh wrote about it, and the American people, now we're talking about people who read the New York Times, not people who were reading the National Enquirer. When he exposed list after list about these illegal programs on American citizens and children, not just adults, but unsuspecting children, it created an uproar, right? So like, people were completely outraged. That led to what we now know as the Church Committee hearings. And so I just want to go, to do this in a way that even somebody who is hearing this today for the first time can understand what I'm saying. And
Absolutely. Sorry to interrupt, but just as a footnote, the person who was the head of the CIA at the time was William Colby. Is that correct? And his body was later found floating in the river. He was the person that supposedly was responsible for letting go the CIA's so-called family jewels. And his son, Carl Colby, later did an excellent documentary about his father. And I mention this because, as in the case of Kirby Sommers, ladies and gentlemen, and in the case of Seymour Hersh, I'll mention these two people who I greatly admire in the same sentence there, is that we do have an opportunity to get this truth out there. Let's not forget, there's also Rachel Den Hollander, who was a aspiring gymnast, who, along with hundreds of other victims, quote unquote victims, because they weren't victims at the end, they were victors. They put this guy, Dr. Larry Nassar, behind bars. They got the USA Gymnastics decertified. And they also sued Michigan State University that was condoning all that. I think there was a trafficking operation. This is not Rachel Den Hollander's interpretation, but it's mine. So the point I'm making here is that this movement here is probably the most important form of reaching this state of higher justice that I've been promoting. What I mean by that is, let's not just rely on the experts to take care of it. The judges, the attorneys, the law enforcement people, the psychotherapists, the professors, all the experts. Let's do it ourselves, and the journalists, because Kirby Sommers is proving that, yes, it can be done. Anyway, that's enough for my editorial comment for now.
Well, that was a very good one. I think that this is a group effort. It can't fall just on, a few people. Everybody can do their part, but it's becoming the more information we put out there, it's becoming clearer to people what the signs are, what to spot. So the church committee hearings were led by uh, Senator Frank Church. He was from Idaho. He chaired these committees, this hearing in 1975 to basically investigate the abuses by the CIA, abuses by the National Security Agency, so the NSA, the abuses by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and even the abuses of the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, because what the CIA would do is if somebody said something or stepped out of hand, they got the Internal Revenue Service to go after even their own, some of their own men would leave in disgust because they didn't want to be part of, they thought they had stepped up to work for the safety of the government and our country as upstanding citizens. They did not realize that when they crossed over into the CIA, who was involved in all of these covert activities, and they were all dark, really just heinous, right? And a lot of them did say, hey, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this. And they would at some point say, I can't do it, I'm leaving. And eventually they would end up in jail. They would end up unemployable because their reputation would be completely smeared. Some of them ended up dead, and some of them ended up with a really big IRS fine, for taxes that probably they did pay, right? So that even the IRS was found to be fraudulently going after. Isn't that amazing? So, here's the thing, that even though the church committee hearing happened, and they, in fact, they interviewed prisoners. Now, in one case, it's just mind-boggling. So they targeted the Black community, which has been targeted. The not just, we know that all the minority communities have been targeted by the CIA and by the agencies that they work with. So, for example, in this particular case, they targeted Black men who had been arrested for, this came out in the church committee hearings, for drug use. They put them in jail. And what happened when they were in jail? The jail that they were in were part of the MK Ultra experiment program. And in fact, Whitey Bulger, that's another case that we can trace to, he was an MK Ultra experiment. And that's, again, something that can be verified by everybody listening to this. So once the person was in the jail, they would be told, oh, why don't you go take part of the I forget what they called it internally in different jails, but it was sort of like the something benign, like go to the test area, and if you become a volunteer, you can, the choice was, if they become a volunteer while they were in jail, while they were in jail and they didn't know it was the MK Ultra program, they could get rewarded in two ways. So they could not get money because obviously the government didn't want any trace. They didn't want to be traced, but they paid them in either reduced time and or drugs, so that we're going to give you drugs, but when you participate in our drug program, where we're going to experiment with you and we're going to give you all LSD, we're going to give you heroin, we're going to give you all kinds of drugs. And they were giving them massive amounts of drugs, putting them in rooms and observing them. And this came out in the church committee hearings, because some of these prisoners testified what happened to them when they were in jail, when they were young, 19 years old, 18-year-olds. And so because they were drug addicts, they opted not for less time in jail, but for give me more drugs. so that they made a perpetual prisoner. Some of these men later on went on to commit suicide, right? Because this alters your mind, it alters your mood forever. That said, the church committee hearings resulted in nobody getting arrested, resulted in nobody going to jail, nobody being held accountable, nobody punished for their crimes. It did, for anybody who was interested at the time, make this information public, but it wasn't written about extensively in mainstream media. It wasn't really covered in mainstream media. This happened in 1975. Now I want to retrace and explain where Jeffrey Epstein was. Jeffrey Epstein, everybody is sort of aware that Jeffrey Epstein, as a child, was a math prodigy. His neighbors thought of him as a genius, a math genius. He was a gifted pianist, even from the time that he was very young. When he was a kid, he tutored his friends in math, so that served him well when he became a teacher. I'm going to use that air quotes when I use the term teacher at Dalton in 1974. So that he sailed through school. He skipped grades 3 and he skipped the 8th grade. He graduated from Lafayette High School in 1969 at the age of 16. He began to take classes at Cooper Union for 2 years until the spring semester of 1971. He then enrolled in New York University, commencing in 1971, September, so the fall semester, through May of 1974. New York University, I just want to remind your audience, is part of the covert, it's the overarm of what sort of controls the CIA and how it's funded. And then the way it's funded is, the way it used to be funded, is that fake LLCs are created and the money is poured into either the psychiatric hospital or the university or the school, or the various places, the prisons, just so many different places that they then, these fake LLCs would sort of pour their money in specifically so that they could study MK Ultra.
Limited liability corporations,
yes,
correct?
yes,
Okay.
yes. So fake corporations to funnel the money, at least until the MK Ultra program was exposed by Seymour Hersh and the church committee hearings. That is how the program was funded. It was funded through the government, through the CIA, through the schools, using these fake corporations. Afterwards, it was funded in a different way that I'll get into shortly. So as Seymour Hersh is writing the New York Times article that again will lead to the church committee hearings, Jeffrey Epstein suddenly stops school without graduating in June of 1974. And where does he show up? He shows up at Dalton, which is one of the most exclusive schools for the most for the children of the most well-heeled, the wealthiest people in New York City. And it is headed by it's just sometimes it's just a little much even for me. It's headed by Bill Barr's father, who we all know as Donald Barr, who was a former OSS operative. So OSS is the Office of Strategic, what was it? The Office of Strategic Services.
Yes.
And it was the precursor of the CIA. And so Jeffrey Epstein is moved into Dalton at the same time that Seymour Hersh is writing this report, which becomes public in December of 1974. he begins to teach mathematics and physics without a degree. So people have been, oh, how did without a degree? Well, because he has been part of this program the whole time. Would you agree that there's something that it seems like this is happening not coincidentally?
Not at all. As Ian Fleming says, first there's happenstance, second it's coincidence, and the third time it happens, it's a military operation.
Is that really? Because I've
That's
never
Ian
heard that.
Fleming, 007, MI6.
Right.
Again,
Okay.
popular fiction. He's telling us everything we need to know.
So to go back to, just for a minute to the early MK Ultra studies, I think, let me just find my note here. Sidney Gottlieb, in fact, someone just stepped up and wrote a book on Sidney Gottlieb. He was the chemist and spy master.
Is that Poisoner in Chief?
Yes, poisoner in chief.
Excellent.
And for the CIA, who in fact was the person who tried to assassinate the guy in Africa, Lumumba. What was his name?
Lumumba, Patrice Lumumba.
Yes, and then he had to fly there and undo it. And even when he was called in to testify for this, again, in the church committee hearings, guess what? Sidney Gottlieb was allowed to use a false name. That's incredible that you're allowed to use a fake name at a congressional hearing. But Sidney Gottlieb, who again, the chemist in chief, who basically his whole life was about creating things to kill Castro, just creating all kinds of drugs, and who again was involved with the MK Ultra program, had a side project. It was called Lolita. Okay, and we all know that Lolita is the 1955 novel by Russian-born novelist Vladimir Nabokov. But Gottlieb had named one of his CIA sub-projects Lolita. And the definition that he himself used, was he wanted to create underage sexual perverts without morals or inhibitions, trained to be spies, trained to appeal to men, to compromise them so they could be blackmailed, and trained to kill them if compromising them failed. We know that Jeffrey Epstein's plane was named Lolita, the Lolita Express, right? Just want to share with you that Jeffrey Epstein had a copy of Lolita in every one of his homes, prominently displayed. He was so interested in Vladimir Nabokov that he invited another guy by the name of Edward J. Epstein, who's a well-known journalist, who's been around for a very long time, and who in fact knew Vladimir Nabokov and who had written about him many years ago. He invited him to his home in New York on the Upper East Side, the largest mansion in New York City that was given to him by Leslie Wexner, because he wanted to have tea with him and have him tell him firsthand about Nabokov. And so he did that. Edward J. Epstein went to his house in 1989.
By the way, are they related, Epstein?
No.
Oh, okay.
No relation.
All
no
right.
relation.
Okay.
So there's again a direct connection to the MK Ultra project Lolita, to Epstein, his Lolita Express. And I don't know if you're followers, people who watch this know that Leslie Wexner, who is the CEO, and yes, in the wake of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, which includes Ghislaine Maxwell, he stepped down as CEO of L Brands. L Brands used to be known as Limited Brands, and Victoria's Secret is just one of many companies that Leslie Wexner owned. Wexner not only gave him, as I said in the first time that I was on your show, he not only gave him the townhouse 9 East 71st Street, he gave him 11 East 71st Street. He gave him the building 311 3rd Avenue, which is on 66th Street, and that is where they would house the models as in sex slaves. That is where Ehud Barak, former prime minister of Israel, would go and spend some time. He also, Leslie Wexner, gave him the private Boeing 727 plane that was dubbed the Lolita Express, and made it possible for him by a transaction that made no sense. He gave him a home in Ohio, Leslie Wexner, on this property that he developed from former farmland. That's where he created his very, very large estate that's now called New Albany. And he had given Epstein the guest house, which is about 30,000 square feet. It's a guest house, but it's 30,000. I'm not saying 3,000. I'm not adding a zero. It is a 30,000 foot guest house, sort of like, it's even on the inside, it replicates the White House. Even on the inside, it replicates the White House. I mean, the whole thing is very creepy. So then he gave it to him, and technically Epstein gave him $3 million for it. So if you follow the money, you don't really get the gist of this story. So some people say, follow the money. No, you can't follow cash, and you can't follow the CIA or the Mossad by following the money. Sorry, you cannot. You have to use other methods. So right, I mean, you can't follow the money because you won't get anything. But in this case, on paper, he paid, theoretically, Wexner $3 million for the house, 30,000 square foot guest house on Wexner's property. Wexner turns around a couple of years later and buys it for exactly the same amount of money. I think it's approximately, I could be off by $1 million or $2 million, $18 million, so that then he turns around and uses the 18 million, approximately $1 million or $2 million, to buy Little St. James, which becomes known as Orgy Island. So that essentially you have a private individual, Leslie Wexner, funneling money to Jeffrey Epstein that enables Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell to have a replica of what was originally the Franklin scandal, right? So I just want to now then go into what happened before the MK Ultra program was discovered and explained to the public via the church committee hearings, and what happened afterwards. So before it was exposed, it was funded through the government in the way that you and I just explained, through these false corporations funneled into the schools, so on and so forth. Once this the church committee hearing happened, and they turned around and they told the CIA, well, you can no longer have this program. Well, by then, the CIA had destroyed all of the records of MK Ultra, destroyed them. The only thing that was left was about a dozen. Again, there could be like maybe from 12 to 15 boxes of just cover letters. So, 12 to 15 boxes is all that was left of thousands of boxes of records that they kept from the 1940s, because that's really when it started, to 1975, when the church committee said, you better bring in your information. And Edward Kennedy was one of the people who was, questioning on behalf of the government. Well, they completely shredded all the evidence, only had about these 15 boxes, lied, in fact, on the stand. Colby, by the way, was criticized for having said too much. Some people believe he was murdered because he said too much during the church committee hearing. So afterwards, the CIA said to Congress, we're done. If you want us to close this, we're done. We've closed it. We're not going to do it again. Do you think they closed it? No, they did not. So what did they do? They went to the Navy. They went directly to the Navy, who had been part of the Philadelphia experiment. They went to the Navy because they're also, they're in New York. They want to stay local. They said, hey, we have this mind control thing. Do you want to help us? The Navy had the Camp Hero. They were no longer using it. They said, well, you know what? We have this property at the tip of Montauk. And sure, why don't you guys go and do what you have to do? And we're not using it. And yes, we're very interested. And so that happened right there in 1974, 1975, when they were saying under oath, we got rid of this program. They go to the Navy, and the Navy sets it up on property that is owned by the New York City Department of Parks. I just want to keep reminding people that Seymour Epstein worked for them, for the owners of where these programs were being held. And they created what is known as the Montauk Project.
Now, Kirby, again, Seymour Epstein was the head guy. He was the top guy.
No, Seymour Epstein is Epstein's father, and he was just a groundskeeper.
Oh, he was not an administrator. He was the groundskeeper.
He was a groundskeeper for the New York City Parks Department.
Okay, that was his legend, at least.
Well,
I don't see him as a groundskeeper for some reason. Not someone who sired a person of genius intellect. Anyway,
well,
that's just
you might have something there. I've just from what I've seen, when a government program looks for, and I have found other cases that I'm not going to discuss today, but so that the way that gifted children are found are through our public schools. I went to a public school. Jeffrey Epstein went to a public school.
So did I.
As long as, yeah. So that if you're very gifted, as Jeffrey Epstein showed himself to be, you're identified by someone that they have placed in the public school.
Not to toot my horn, but I was in the very first competition of the academic decathlon out of Savannah High School in Orange County. It's founded by Robert Peterson, who probably was connected in some fashion. Anyway,
well, maybe you weren't 10, which is the age that they want. So they want kids. Were you 10?
No, I was in high school. It's called the academic decathlon, but it's an identification program, as you mentioned.
There you go. So
I won my category, by the way. Anyway, please.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Thank you very much. But why am I here? I made the wrong decisions. Quote.
Exactly, because if you were to make the decision they wanted for you, you would have been rewarded. And in fact, before I get into this, I want to just, to your point, because when you bring up something, there are gems in what you say. So I want to just go back to one of the victims of the Franklin scandal, to show how you are correct. Because when we're talking, I want to be comfortable with you, and as we have been, and if we have to jump around, because we may not have this moment again, right? So Paul Bonacci he was made to, here it is. He was taken into the program at the age of 3. He was, they really looked for children that they could lure from their parents or steal off the street. And the age of 3 was the ideal age, because at the age of 3, that is really where the satanic ritual abuse, so that the abuse begins at the age of 3. And then if it starts at that time and you're not dead, and they can traumatize you and split your personality, they can turn you into either a trained assassin, a sex slave, or a puppet who will be propelled into higher office. So Paul Bonacci, again, during his deposition, said, and I believe I have my Paul Bonacci notes separately, so let me just find it.
Well, while you're looking, there's also the Super Soldier program, and one example of that is Eldrick Woods, better known as Tiger Woods, who was at that age of 3, where his father, who was in special forces in Vietnam, trained his son to become this super athlete. It's sort of a proof of concept as a pro golfer. And of course, as we know, he began to fray when his handler, Nordgren, whose mothers and father, by the way, were very highly placed bureaucrats in the Swedish government, he began to fray at the edges. And we saw what happened when they go out.
No, I think that you're right. You see, now when we have this basic information that you and I are sharing, it's easy to identify who's in the program and who wasn't, right? Because I didn't know that about Tiger Woods, although I do have a chapter in one of my books about Tiger Woods, because something about him caught my fancy. Yes. No wonder. I wonder why. But you see, when you say that, we can now start identifying, oh, this guy, that guy, this woman, that woman. So during his Paul Bonacci's deposition, he said that they were going to make him an ambassador in Germany for a couple of years. After his ambassadorship, he would then become an elected official in the United States. So that effectively he would become a puppet. So there you have the perfect Manchurian candidate, right? So, I mean, this is in his deposition. These are court records that anybody can find. And if it's still online, if you keep looking for him, you might hear it from his own lips. Jeffrey Epstein, I believe, was initially sort of like discovered to be a smart guy. But what happened in, let's say, at the Montauk Project, and there's another one that I want to be able to discuss if our time doesn't run out, you let me know, that happened pre-Montauk. It happened at Broadmoor, and Broadmoor is essentially what the church committee explored. And again, it's on Long Island, so not far from where they put the Montauk Project. So it's Brookhaven National Laboratories, again, on parkland owned by the New York City Parks Department, Seymour Epstein's employer. So what the engineers who worked there, the scientists who worked there, they were instructed, speak to people, find children for us. They did, at that moment in time, they weren't necessarily, looking for bright kids. They were just looking for any kids. And so it's very likely that at some point, because let's not forget, Seymour Epstein and his wife, with their two children, lived in a very modest home in Brooklyn. While a lot of the photographs show it as a three-story home, it was really three apartments, and they lived on the second floor. So they lived in an apartment, sort of a private home that is, transformed into apartments. And so with their income, she was a school teacher, so you have another school connection. He worked for the New York City Parks Department, but still, these are not even middle class for the standards of that time. These are working class family. So for a working class family to have had the money to send Jeffrey Epstein at the age of 14 to wait, I have it right here.
Somehow Epstein came under the scrutiny of a Donald Barr or the Finders, or with a small f, not a capital F, Finders, but recruiters, spotters, let's call them.
Well, he came under their eye early, but I'm just trying to remember the name because I don't know if I have it in my notes here, but just bear with me because I like facts.
Oh, certainly, yes.
I like facts. And
while you're searching for it, I can refer to two of the
okay, I
seminal
got it.
books on. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so that at the age of 14, and I think I sent you a photograph, Jeffrey Epstein goes to the very prestigious Interlochen Arts Academy. Okay, and Interlochen, and so he went at the age of 14 in 1967. I sent you a photograph. And by this time, if you can see his demeanor, it's very different. He doesn't look as happy as the rest of the kids. And he's in high school at this time, right? Because he's skipped the third grade. He has skipped the eighth grade. So he's in high school. However, one of the victims that testified recently in the Ghislaine Maxwell case was procured at Interlochen. Yes. Isn't that a coincidence?
Yeah.
Okay, so Interlochen, and what was brought up that I didn't know but I had as I said, my little spies in the courtroom because the judge, Nathan, did not want to make this accessible to the public as she should have. And we know that it's to keep the basic public from hearing about the case, to keep it very narrow, and so that the only place to really hear about it for the majority of people who don't listen to you or to me is through mainstream media, which would be a controlled narrative, right? So one of those victims was procured at the same school that Jeffrey Epstein went. And one of the things I learned while I was reading the transcripts that only I have, I think, of the trial, she went to the prestigious Interlochen school when she was 13, 14, and it cost, her father had just died, it cost $4,000 in 1993 when she was procured. So although Jeffrey Epstein went to the same school in 1967, it wasn't free, right? So one would think that, I'm not great at math, so maybe you are, but it had to cost something in 1967. Interlochen, all of the presidents of the United States, when the Interlochen summer school begins, and this goes back to John F. Kennedy, will have sort of like a ceremony to welcome these 13 and 14-year-old kids who are music students, technically very gifted. But I just find this interesting that the presidents are involved in Interlochen. Jeffrey Epstein was able to then, and I believe Interlochen is one of these red spots, one of these red zones. Like I believe the New York Arts Academy is a red zone.
What do you
That,
mean by red zone? Is that like an intelligence zone?
yeah, I think it's
Okay.
I think it's one of these arms that are
Oh, okay.
used, there's a word for it. I don't know what that word is, but it's something that is controlled. uh it's an arm of the intelligence agency. And so,
Well, I know this is also the time when Jackie Kennedy, the first lady, was consorting or cultivating cultural figures from the music world, including the I guess he's a cellist. What's his name? I can't remember. Pablo Casals. They made lot of
right,
a big to do on that in the Life magazine of the CIA outlets, and also Leonard Bernstein. He was made into a pop figure in the whole area of orchestral classical music. So that is really consistent with your findings on the Interlochen.
so yeah, so that Interlochen allowed Jeffrey Epstein to build his own building. It was just like, I think, I don't, but that's, he had his own building. He then became the person who held for everyone who, for if you had been an alumni of Interlochen, Jeffrey Epstein was the one who held the yearly parties. How do you become that person, that you're the one who yearly, you're going to host the yearly party for Interlochen, unless you are part of you're part of it. And so, so it just shows the importance of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Interlochen put out a statement, just like MIT put out a statement, just like Leslie Wexner put out a statement, just like Leon Black put out a statement, and I can just go down the list and stay talking about everybody who put out a statement proclaiming, dear Lord, I did not know this about Jeffrey Epstein. All of these Harvard, everybody put out a statement. It's still on their website, the statement distancing themselves from Jeffrey Epstein. We did not know. If we had known, but we did not know. And, there are all these statements all over the internet on all of these major, well-known institutions, I'm going to call them. But guess what? It's all fabricated. We were not involved. Yes, they were involved. So I believe that somehow, because Epstein's father was really working the ground, so he had to have knowledge of these programs. And maybe he said to somebody, because people talked, you boast about your child. Oh, my child is a genius. My child is, and then maybe they said to him, this will never know how it happened, but it happened when Epstein was very young. And I'll explain why I believe it happened when he was very young in a minute. I believe that to this point, I haven't found anything showing me that Seymour was and Pauline Epstein were more than just these working class parents with two children. I believe that they were sucked into allowing their son, Jeffrey Epstein, the math genius, to go and go with these nice men here at the Brookhaven lab, also in Long Island, where he was working. And they're going to help us. They're going to help you with your education, which apparently they did. So at the age of 12, Jeffrey Epstein reads a book called The Man from Orgy at the age of 12. Now, The Man from Orgy is a 1965 James Bondish book. Was written by Theodore Mark Gottfried, who used the pen name Ted Mark. And it's about a con man who manages to travel the world under the guise of being a sex researcher as a spy for the United States government. The novel contains toddler brothels. It goes into detail about infants and children being raped and trained to be sex slaves. The research laboratory, ORGY, stands for Organization for the Rational Guidance of Youth. The subjects are 3-year-olds who, in addition to being raped multiple times every day, also endure beatings as part of their sex slave training. So somebody by the name of Leland Nally wrote an article in Mother Jones called I Called Everyone in Jeffrey Epstein's Little Black Book. And while he didn't make the same connection that I made, he did discover that he met someone in Jeffrey Epstein's circle. And I actually also met someone in Jeffrey Epstein's circle who had given me this information. And I've discovered that Leland Nally wrote an article again in Mother Jones saying that one of Jeffrey Epstein's friend, an actress that he met in the early 1980s, so this is before Glenn, while, he's probably just out there, after he left the financial world, and he's supposed to be finding money. I forget what he called himself, but he told this woman who used a pseudonym for the article that was written in Mother Jones. So the name that she used is Julie, and she knew Epstein for many years, said that Epstein said to her, read this book, because if you read this book, it will explain to you who I am. Now, when somebody tells you who they are the first time, what do? I believe them. Don't you think that's really interesting that he would say to one of his friends, read this book. It will tell you who I am, and this is what inspired me to become rich.
This is the book, The Man from Orgy?
Yes.
Okay.
How does a 12-year-old, unless he's already in the program, right, get his hands on something that talks about 3-year-old toddler brothels? He reads this at the age of 12. I mean, do you think that that's like a normal read for a 12-year-old boy?
He was probably handed to him as a briefing book.
That's yeah. I mean, I just thought, okay, well, there's just so many of these things that are interconnected. It's like it's not a coincidence that he ends up having a trafficking ring made up of minor girls and minor boys, and frankly, there are a lot of other people in between. Trafficking them. And actually, what most people seem to fail to recognize is that a blackmail ring is only effective if you gather information to use, right? So that what are we doing? It's called espionage, right? So that the children that he and Ghislaine Maxwell took under their wing, and don't forget, he was having children come into his house for many, many years. He was left alone. Tens of thousands of children, testing. I always, in Jeffrey Epstein Predator Spy, I do say that, he was testing these kids, and no one but me saw it as a test. But because I had been trafficked and I had seen the underbelly of this world and what dark people do, I noticed part of it. I had not noticed all of it, but I noticed part of it. And
Hmm.
I knew that there is no way that he was doing this just for himself, that this was part of something. It's a test, you know. You're going to test who you can push, whose boundaries you can push, very much like what Harvard was doing with Ted Kaczynski, right? Because already they're not 3-year-olds, they're older, just like you were when you won that thing. You were at that age where you could still be indoctrinated, right?
Hmm.
Because the children, and I'm going to go back and explain a little bit deeper if I have time and if you let
Certainly.
me.
By the way,
Okay.
as you were speaking, I ordered The Man from Orgy.
Oh, bravo.
Yeah. Do you have a copy of it?
No, I don't.
I'll make a scan and send it to you.
Thank you. Okay. So do you have any questions before I continue?
Oh, no, except that, you were talking about the children that were being trafficked, as young as 3 years old. And there's a lot of chatter currently about underground bases where these children are being housed, supposedly currently. And I wonder if you have any intel on that.
I don't have intel on underground right now that's happening, but I do know that's where they kept them,
Mhm.
both in the Montauk Project and in Brookhaven. They were kept underground, so it would not surprise me. Can you tell me what you heard?
Yeah, there's well, the acronym, I suppose, and this is what I got from a book by Richard Sauder, or a couple of them, Sauder, Sauder.
Yeah,
And the acronym is DUM, Deep Underground Military
yeah.
Bases. What do you have on that? And
Well,
you were a real professional real estate person, and you're native Manhattanite, and you know about all those
well,
tunnels and catacombs, if you will.
well. Actually, that's what we're discussing because the
Oh,
Montauk Project is a dumb. It's a.
oh.
Oh, I'm sorry that I didn't mention it.
Well,
Thank you
no,
for
no, you
bringing.
mentioned that there were these villages, sort of Potemkin fake villages
Ah,
topside, but the real action is below the
okay.
surface.
So yeah, all right.
Oh,
Thank you for
okay.
taking me back here. So that is a dumb. What you just said. It's a. Can you just give me
Yes,
the acronym?
deep
Deep.
underground military base.
Okay, so in 1974, when the United States Navy allowed this group, and by the way, the people who were in charge of the program were the German Nazis. It's not even like they gave it to an American professor, let's say, for argument's sake. The people who ran the MK Ultra program were always the German Nazis. They were the ones in control. I just want to be clear to put that out there. They were in control at Brookhaven National Labs, which is also a DUMB, and they were in control at the Montauk Project. So at the Montauk Project, at the easternmost point of Long Island, off of New York, which it's still New York City. Um, when they moved there in 1974, the Navy did a couple of things. Like I said, they built a fake fishing village, but they also wanted to disguise themselves from being seen as the Navy. So what did they do? They made believe they were the Air Force. So they talk about you know, a lie within a lie within a lie within a lie. So it's like the Russian dolls, right? You keep opening one to find another. So they disguised themselves as the United States Air Force. And I think in the document I sent you a photograph, and it shows Air Force personnel, but it's really Navy personnel dressed up as the Air Force. So it fooled even the locals thinking, oh, it's an Air Force base. No, it's a naval base. So initially it had what is called a cavern, because you can't call it a basement, right? It had initially a cavern that is beneath the surface of Montauk. They went in there and they built on top of that cavern another 5 stories of underground. So they sealed it off. And then on top of that, they built their fake buildings in certain areas, right? And their lab, which had the big antenna, which was used for these experiments. And I sent you a photograph of the antenna. And in fact, the show on MK Ultra, Stranger Things, uses that antenna in their advertising, and you can just pull it up on any search engine, Montauk Project, and you will see photographs of the antenna. So they put that on top of the landfill, and then it was several layers of fraudulent underground, but it became a DUMB, and that's where they would put the children. So that, yes, they were
Oh,
underground there, and they were also underground in
were they
where
was there an
yeah,
underground, a dump on the Zorro Ranch that Epstein had over in
yes,
okay, could you elaborate on that?
there was an underground there, and there was an underground on the island, and there are photographs that I was able to find. As everyone, almost, I think everyone knows, that Ghislaine Maxwell was not only trained as a helicopter pilot, but she was trained as a pilot for a submarine. And I think I sent you photographs of that were taken, aerial shots over Jeffrey Epstein's Little St. James,
Mhm.
showing they had a submarine dock. And the underground area was photographed by a woman that is very well known to people who are looking into the Jeffrey Epstein case, but no one is allowed to talk about her. And her name is Chelsea Handler.
Oh, the comedian.
No, sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
sorry. Chelsea, Rachel Chandler. Rachel Chandler.
Okay, yes.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I get these names confused. So sometimes these names are so Rachel Chandler is the heiress to the Los Angeles Times media empire. She is one of the richest women in the world. And she was, at the time that Epstein had his thing, she was one of the young girls that hung around with Jeffrey Epstein, and she took photographs of the underground area. She, in 2013, married Tom Guinness, who is heir to the Guinness fortune. Rachel Chandler took a photograph that she had in, it's no longer there, by the way. But she took a photograph of the underground, underneath the temple, which was, again, it was the way that Jeffrey Epstein built that temple. It's not really a door where you see the door, that's just painted. It's painted to give false to anybody who just sees it.
Yeah.
It's
In French, it's trolle.
yeah,
Trick the eye.
Yeah, it's to trick the eye. Everything here is just a magician's trick. Everything is to trick the eye. So she took photographs of the underground area. No one is allowed to speak about her, because if you speak about her, let's say on Twitter, your account is suspended. So she's just one of these, like I said, on the first time that I was on your show, the Jeffrey Epstein case, according to mainstream media, focuses only on underprivileged, economically challenged young girls. And I said to you the very first time that you and I spoke, that's not true, because Paris Hilton is somebody that Ghislaine Maxwell spotted at a party, and she said, "Oh, I want her for Epstein." So that there are very wealthy people connected to the Epstein thing. Now, I want to just stay a minute with Rachel Chandler, because Rachel took a lot of photographs of Epstein's homes that she would post on her social media. So before this became a very prominent case, I was going through her social media a lot, before things started to just disappear. And I took JPEGs or screenshots, whatever I could from her social media. I wasn't really sharing it on Twitter at the time. I wasn't active. I didn't start my account about the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell covert intelligence agency operations, all of these other odd things that happened with the government. I didn't start that until July of 2019, right after Jeffrey Epstein was arrested. But I had a lot of these photographs in my possession because I was, it piques my interest. It reminded me of the Franklin scandal. Ira Brickless was involved with, like to me, I just knew that I needed to know, why do the people want to kill me? I've had multiple attempts on my life. I was still trying to connect the dots. What is so important about me there are repeated attempts on my life? I needed to find it. Why are people from the government calling me? Why are people with strange names like Shogun connected to the CIA in my life? Why is this guy from the State Department still in my life after 20 years? I needed to find the answers. And so I decided, I was dating someone. I sat him down when Jeffrey Epstein was arrested. It was the 4th of July weekend of 2019. We were just hanging around, and I sat him down in the hotel lobby, and I said, listen, I have to explain who I am to you, because we had been dating for a while and he didn't really know my history. And so I kind of told him, and he sat there and okay, okay, okay. And then I said, and now this guy, Jeffrey Epstein, has been arrested. And I'm going to be doing this on a full-time basis. I'm going to, and at the time I had a very basic Twitter account for my real estate business that I didn't know how to use. And so I used it sparingly. I opened it in 2014. I've been in real estate since 2000. And I didn't really know how to use Twitter. I said to him, I need your help. I need you to teach me how to use Twitter. And he did. But he said to me, one of my kids was raped when he was a kid, and he subsequently developed a drug problem. And he eventually committed suicide as a result. And this is a very touchy subject for me. And I don't know if I have the strength to support you. And I looked at him and I said, well, I have to do this. And he said, okay, I understand. And so it was either I marry him and I go on and try to become normal, but I can't because things continue to happen in my life, or I take this opportunity, which I thought was a once in a lifetime. I either get on this train that's moving, I either get on this train and find the other pieces of my life, the other answers that I'm looking for. And pardon me, because I have to collect myself.
Well, I thank you for making this decision that not only answers questions about your own life, but is benefiting us. It's benefiting, I don't know, innumerable current, past, and potential victims. So I thank you for making that decision, even though it was at a cost to what I assume a cost to your relationship.
My relationship, my life, my time. But COVID happened almost immediately, which isolated us. And it made it easier for me to just keep digging. I became doggy with a bone, and I kept following things I remembered that had happened to me, connections that I said, okay, this is similar. I need to go here. And I'm sorry for crying. I didn't think I'd cry.
Well, the whole lockdown, if you want to look the way you explained it, it seems like it was providential.
It was great. I taught myself how to cook for the first time in my life.
Well, when are you going to fix that tub?
What tub?
The leak, the water, the
Well,
shower. No?
um, that's a different, so that the money that these guys collected, like through their covert programs, let's
Uh-huh.
say, and this probably will necessitate another conversation, was poured into real estate. So I live in a building owned by the Lansky family, by the Kornfeld family,
Wait a
by the,
minute. As in Meyer Lansky?
correct.
As in Bernie Kornfeld?
Yes,
Oh my gosh.
they're all connected to this.
Okay. Oh my gosh.
And
I
so
can,
what happened? So what this is, so I made a so this is the apartment that I moved into when I was in my 20s. And I kept it, even though I would move out of it, back in when I was in my 20s, it was an affordable apartment. And I always, even if when I got married and I lived elsewhere, or I lived in LA for a while, I kept it because I just thought, well, it doesn't cost that much money. I want to keep it. So this is the apartment where I was held hostage, and then where I fled. Now, when I was held hostage at knife point for 5 days, it was an ordered hit. I don't want to get into the whole thing right now, but I did manage to escape after 5 days. I got on a plane despite the orders that were given to me by Ira Rickless. I would have been dead if I followed his advice. I did not follow his advice, which really was, um, here's $1,000. Take your American Express, because I managed to get permission from my captor to go to my store, which was a few blocks away, to speak to the girls who worked for me so that they would not call the police. That was the guise under which I was able to escape. And so my captor told me I had 30 minutes to go to the store, tell the girls I was okay, come back to my apartment, or he would go and kill all of us. I went to the store. I called Ira immediately. He owns the world's biggest security company. He had already wired my place, my store, not my apartment. I never understood why he didn't wire my apartment. I get it now, because he was in my apartment and he didn't want his stuff to be broadcast. But he had my store wired, and obviously he had my store wired in such a way that he knew everything I said, and he was able to follow everything I did in the store that he allowed me to have, which was a very short-lived situation, because then I was meant to be killed, right? Because I'm getting ready to leave at some point, and rather than me leave, I'm going to be dead, right? Because then I won't remember, I won't say anything to anyone. So I called him and I said to him, and he'd always basically had protection, so that he had his chauffeur, whose name I'll always remember, Norman, was always, he was a bodyguard with a gun, and he would take his two children to school and drive him around, and he would often brag how Norman would take a bullet for him, right? So like I didn't understand that at that time, what that meant, what it meant that somebody would take a bullet for you, or that you need to be with somebody who is carrying a gun. In New York City, we're not a gun city, or we're not a state. We're it just never occurred to me that people had guns until I met him. And to this weird world. And so that he would often say to me, oh, you're so brave, I'm not as brave as you. And he would just say things that I just sometimes, I just never really understood why he would say certain things, other than he knew that I had been trafficked and I survived that. Just composing myself. So I called him up and I said, hey, I've been held hostage. I need a bodyguard. Help. To which he replied, how he would know that this I only discovered many years later, but in my brain, it's there forever. To which he replied, I'm sorry, I might cry again, warning. To which he replied, it's too late for a bodyguard. That's very chilling in hindsight. But it wasn't chilling when I heard it. I just, didn't understand why he said it's too late for a bodyguard. A man who had taken so many precautions with bodyguards and armed people driving him around who would take bullets for him and his children, said to me, I will be there in 5 minutes. And I'm thinking, you cannot come here in 5 minutes because you will be dead. And I told him, you can't come because this is what I have been told. So you know what? He was in my store from his place. His place is on 57th Street. He may have been closer for all I know, right? Because obviously he was part of this. He organized it in hindsight. It took many years for me to find out. But he was literally in my store, which was on 74th Street in New York, from what I thought was his place on 57th Street, within 5 to 7 minutes. That's an almost impossible thing to accomplish, right? He knew that because he had told me, and American Express is part of the CIA thing again, okay? It's Bank of New York. He had me get an American Express card at a certain year. He had me put that in a safe in the store. So he knew I had that card. He came to the store. He said to me, I want you to open your safe, get your American Express card, take it out. I'm going to run to now with the threat that this crazy man who's held me hostage at knife point, who has already raped me, by the way, held me hostage at knife point. The police, I called them twice. They do not come to my rescue when he's breaking in. With all of this and knowing what I always thought he was a coward, he says, I'm going to run across the street to the bank. There's a Chase Manhattan. It's still a Chase Bank across the street on 72nd and Columbus. It's still there. I'm going to go to Chase. I'm going to get some money. I'll be right back. This is a billionaire. I expected to see piles of cash to, wherever I'm going to go, I'm going to need piles of cash. He comes back into the store. I have the American Express. I'm wearing a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. He holds me in a very dramatic way. He says, here's $1,000. I'm looking at the $1,000, the $100 bills, like he's crazy. You have to be crazy. You're giving me $1,000. He says to me the following words. He says, I want you to go to the nearest airport. Do not tell me where you're going. Very dramatic now, right? But while I'm listening to it, I'm in a state of shock. I took his $1,000. I took the American Express. He said, I want you to get on the first plane out of New York. Then I want you to pay cash for your, no, I want you to, I forget. I have it written in The Billionaire's Woman, but I forget for right now. So I want you to buy a ticket. Do not go anywhere where anybody knows you. And then get off that plane and buy another ticket. And, tickets in those days were $600 if you wanted to go anywhere on that state at the same time. You couldn't really, unless you want to go to Atlantic City, it's like you had to pay a lot of money. Even in those days, the tickets were really higher than they are today. So he said to me, and so change the airplane and then get on another flight and go somewhere else, again, where nobody knows you. I do not want you to call me. It's very odd for somebody who is supposed to be part of my life. I want you to then start using your credit card. Well, come on. So I would have been dead within 24 hours, right? I have $1,000 to my name. I'm supposed to get on 2 flights where I know nobody, and that I'm supposed to start staying in a hotel and not tell anybody where I am, and not even call him and tell him but use my American Express card. So that didn't sound right to me, because for me, I was terrified and I needed my friends. And I was very lucky. I had three of my very best friends living in Los Angeles. And I went to the airport and I called one of my friends in Los Angeles and I said, listen, I'm getting on I forget what time flight, and I will be landing at 5:05. I need for you to pick me up at the airport. So that's what I did. And then I stayed in Los Angeles for 8 years. And I didn't come back to New York until 2000 when I began my real estate career. But come on, don't you think that the way that he handled that showed that I was really not supposed to be alive at the end of my escape?
Wow, what a harrowing experience, to put it lightly. And thank goodness for good friends. And would you say you were hiding out in LA, or were you open in Los Angeles? I'm sure
Oh
you
no,
had contacts there.
I had my three best friends were there, and and ultimately, I mean, I didn't understand the IRA situation, and he would come to LA,
Oh, I
and or
see.
he would have me come to New York, but it gave me the opportunity that when he is not on top of me 24/7, which he had been, to realize that, oh, wait a minute, there is life outside of him, because he had made my world so small that my world only was him. And
Hmm.
I had lost touch with my family, I had lost touch with my friends. He was basically calling me and saying, be ready, we're going to go here, we're going to go to Washington DC. And that's how I knew that he was connected to the Federal Reserve. That's how I knew he was connected to Joe Biden. That's how I knew he was connected to the Clintons. That's how I knew that his world, that's how I knew they were connected to Kennedy. They were connected to NASA, which is another show for another time.
Was he
Uh,
connected to Donald Trump?
oh, of course, they had three floors at Trump's building. They were, yeah, they're all, their nexus is very small at the top. They're all interconnected. They're all connected. So that's why I knew that I had to just follow this case. So getting to the Rachel Chandler situation, Rachel was not only part of the Epstein trafficking ring and took a lot of photographs that I shared with you. She was also part of the Nexium um, uh, sex slave ring.
Oh, I didn't know
And
that.
well, did you get the documents that I sent you this
Well,
morning?
I must have missed that part about her Nexium connection with Keith Raniere
Yeah.
and the Bronfman sisters.
Yes. And so if in the photographs that I sent you a PDF. I just put a couple of her photos that she had put up on her Instagram a very long time ago. So in 2016, imagine I'm collecting information on Rachel Chandler.
Mhm,
Rachel Handler. Who is it? Chandler. I just want to get her name right. Hold on.
mhm.
Rachel Chandler from 2016. Long before I start working on 2015, sorry, long before I start working on this case, uh, because it reminded me, right, of things I had heard before.
Mhm.
And I was like, this is interesting. There's something here that I need to discover. Well, one of those photographs is of Nancy Saltzman, who is the co-founder of Nexium, uh, when she was young, right? And so it also shows a photograph of Rachel with the Nexium brand, what he was doing with Keith Raniere. How do you pronounce his last name?
I believe it's Raniere. He had a super high IQ, right? Like
Yeah,
Jeffrey
and
Epstein.
exactly. And
Yeah.
and I've been trying to find his connection to Monaco, to Prince Rainier.
Oh, yes. And Princess Grace, who was rumored to be part
Yes.
of a sex cult there.
And I believe there's a connection, but I have not been able to find any documentation. And I've looked high and low. So I'm putting out the call like you do. I'm learning from you. Anybody who's listening, if you can connect Keith Rainier to uh, the Prince of Rainier, who was was he a prince or the king of Monaco? The king of Monaco, right? Or the
Well,
prince?
he was referred to as prince, but he was the king. He was the sovereign,
Right.
the
And
Principality of Monaco.
so if anybody can connect these two, because I believe there's a connection there,
Okay.
um, that would be great. One of my friends lived in Monaco for 30 years, but we're no longer speaking, so I can't really call her for this information. So there
You
is a
might be
photo.
one of the illegitimate children of Prince Rainier, who was known as a playboy.
Who might be an illegitimate?
Keith Rainier, possibly.
He might be.
I'm just speculating, but that seems to be a pattern.
He might be. And so one of the other photographs that I took, and this I did not take from her Instagram. She had other, in those days there were other social media accounts, MySpace, or other accounts. And so she had pictures of Jeffrey Epstein's island, like I said, of the underground space where, again, everything was monitored, televised, right? They had the monitoring rooms were set up with TV, what were like, TVs that looked into every area, not just of the island, but of the homes, of the bedrooms, of the underground. And so in one of these photographs that I found of Rachel Chandler, and other people have found it too, I'm not the only one, it's clear that in the underground area, there's a room where there's a lot of little boys. Yes, and so that's frightening. And then there's another photograph.
Little boys, you mean like below age 10?
Yes, like
okay.
little boys that look like they're maybe 6, 7, 8. I sent it to you, so you should.
Yes. Well, I wanted you to articulate it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so another photo I found was of her in an outdoor area with a baby that looks like it's only maybe a month or two old. This is a sacrificial ritual that's going to take place, because she wrote about it in those. I guess she thought nobody was going to look at her social media. So then when I saw your talk with Manny Grossman, who I didn't really know before until last week or the other day when you did your talk with him, you guys talked about a pentagram that he found at Untermeyer Park. And I immediately went to the pentagram that I found on Ray Chandler's page, her Instagram account, showing two little girls who look like they're 3, laying on a pentagram. Pentagram is the 5-pointed star surrounded with candles. And there's one little girl wearing all black. It's a black hooded robe, by the way, with a knife in her hand, a very large dagger, by the way, with another little girl, blonde, wearing white in the middle. And you can only assume that this little girl that's in the middle, and they're both smiling because, you're 3 years old, you think you're playing a game. The one little girl is going to be killed on this 5-pointed star. And so I just sent you that earlier this morning, and I will, before we're wrapping up very soon, and I will let your followers and my followers know where to find this information. And
Okay.
as far as the house that he had in Santa Fe, That's really much deeper. Yes, it had an underground space, but because of his connection to the government and what he um and the covert program that is a government connected program that for example, Iran Contra, most people forget, and this was not in the Iran Contra hearings, but our partner, the United States partner, when I said our, I meant the United States, not you and I, but the
Oh, no.
partner of the United States in Iran Contra was Israel, so that the CIA and Mossad worked Iran Contra. Another thing that they worked collaboratively, and they've been working collaboratively since the beginning, and some of this is in Predator Spy, some of it is in my other books. But the other program that they worked collaboratively was the theft of the Promise software. Are you familiar with the Promise software?
Yes, Danny Casolaro, the journalist. Yes.
Yes. And so
Octopus.
one of
Mhm.
my sources is actually William Hamilton.
Oh, okay.
I
Wow.
have very good sources.
Absolutely.
I have firsthand sources.
Yeah,
So
I'm just looking at the secondary, the published versions, but you're going right to the living and breathing sources. Excellent.
yeah, and even someone like Hamilton, after all these years, is afraid he will be killed because he was scheduled to be killed. And he shared that with me, but that's again, that's we're going into another rabbit hole.
Mhm.
So Nexium is connected, and I had discovered through another source that Jeffrey Epstein had um, feeders. So we know about Jean-Luc Brunel, for example, in the modeling industry in Paris, who was feeding him young, aspiring models who then he turned into these sex slaves, right? Under the guise of you're a masseuse or you're going to become a model. Well, Epstein also fed girls into Nexium, and no mainstream has discussed this, um, but we're discussing it. And so I think there's a connection with what your friend Manny Grossman is trying to uncover,
Would
and
you like me
this.
to introduce you to?
Sure. I mean, I don't have a lot of time, to be
Oh,
honest, to go
okay.
into another rabbit hole, but I'm
All
happy
right.
to. If he listens to this and he has a question, he can email me or call me. You have
Oh,
my number,
excellent.
and so I'm happy to But I think that there's a connection because these pentagrams are not. They're part of something that's learned, and it's part of the way that I've been able to piece it together. And I'm going to cover one last thing, and then we can call it quits for the day.
Okay.
I believe that it's part of that when they're breaking the children for the MK Ultra program. And again, I'm using MK Ultra as an umbrella term. What they're doing and what they trained their personnel to do is that they're torturing the children, they're raping them multiple times a day. Some of them die. Some of them are murdered if they're too weak, literally murdered. Those who are strong, somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, who I believe went through this kind of torment, and he was. I'm working on another link that has exposed itself that even he exposed, but I'm going to leave that for the future because I have not written it yet. But it shows that he was probably one of these people like Paul Bonacci, who was having to go to these parties and have uh, inappropriate relationships with politicians. I believe that Epstein, when he was younger, had this kind of relationship. That is why he can have sex with both, with male and female. And that is why Ghislaine also is the same way. And that is why they are the way they are. So the last area that I want to do, may I?
Please, yes, yeah.
Okay.
The
Let me
floor is
find.
yours.
You're very kind to allow me so much time to
No, the
explain this.
kindness is you're extending your kindness to us. Thank you very much. Please.
Okay, so I'm just looking through my many pages of notes here. Okay. And by the way, for the information I have, I pulled information from the CIA files, from the FBI files, from historical newspapers, right? So that information that I'm sharing with you today is all information that I've gathered from the documents. This is not just information that I created as I connect this to historical events,
Oh,
not
absolutely.
information that comes out of nowhere. I just want to find here. Let me just do a quick search for Brookhaven to explain to you. Okay, so I started to discuss with you Brookhaven National Laboratories. So they were also connected. They were on Long Island. And before the MK Ultra was told to shut down in 1973, this is where our government was doing the MK Ultra experiments, commencing in 1945, again with the Nazi scientists they brought over. And it was also surrounded by parkland that is maintained by the New York City Parks Department. This lab is really large. It was one of the main labs in the world, sort of comparable to Los Alamos, right? So it would be the eastern equivalent of the Los Alamos nuclear facility that we have in New Mexico that was not far from Epstein's home. And there's a reason that he needed to be that close to that spot, by the way.
Oh,
Yeah. So the research at Brookhaven included nuclear, physics, science, technology, environmental, bioscience, nanoscience, national security. It was originally owned by the Atomic Energy Commission. It's now owned and operated by the United States Department of Energy. And so this is where most of those MK Ultra experiments were secretly conducted underground, like you said, in a dump, right? So on countless of unsuspecting people, including thousands of children. So those who were in charge of the program were given free rein to obtain either adults, like, people who were drunks on the street, homeless people that would not be missed, bring them in, sober them up for a week, experiment on them, and you either kill them, literally kill them, or they died, or you threw them back out onto the street, and eventually they're going to die anyway because they're now a little bit destroyed. And so it is this place, Brookhaven National Laboratory, which was operated by Associate Universities Incorporated. So Associated Universities Incorporated was on behalf of the United States Atomic Energy Commission, and the universities included, as I said earlier, Columbia University, which we know is an early place where the studies of anthropology, which are connected to the Barr family, right? So I have information in Predator Spy, Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy, about Bill Barr's grandparents. And They were involved in the Columbia University early studies on eugenics and, all of that good stuff. That was there. Cornell University, Harvard University, which we know not only was Jeffrey Epstein giving them money, but he had an office at Harvard. Were you aware that he had an office at Harvard?
I did not know that.
Yep, he had a private office at Harvard University, and they too have one of those letters on their website declaring themselves. We had no idea.
Was he a fellow at one of the many quote unquote research institutions there that Harvard has, a research fellow?
Well, no, he was, but he was a member of the off the top,
The corporation, the Harvard Corporation?
no, he was none of that. He was just a
Oh,
pipe, and he was a part of this larger program. He was a member of the Foreign Council. What is it? The Foreign Council on
the Council on Foreign Relations?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So he was a member of that. His brother Mark is still a member of that, which is for 16 years until he was caught the second time. But he was a member of that. And that's a separate entity. That's really not as you know, the Council of Foreign Relations is not a government subsidized program. This is a separate program.
Yeah, and it's a British operation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the University of Pennsylvania was under the umbrella of Associated Universities, Princeton University, University of Rochester, and Yale. And we know that the Bushes come from Yale, and we know about the Skull and Bones. All of these things are connected to this dark government program, so that we know that from just mainstream media sources that Epstein was connected to Harvard and with MIT, and that he was, I mean, like he was just connected to these places. He had his own office. The university acknowledged receiving in Harvard a total of $9.1 million from 1998 to 2008 to support a variety of research and faculty activities. The president of MIT, Raphael Reif, wrote a letter dated August 22, 2019 to the MIT community, and our good friend Joey Ito was ousted from there. But in the letter, he states, here are the core facts as best as we can determine. Over the course of 20 years, MIT received approximately $800,000 via foundations controlled by Jeffrey Epstein. All of those gifts were either to MIT Media Lab or to Professor Seth Lloyd. Both Seth and Media Lab director Joy Ito have made public statements apologizing to Jeffrey Epstein's victims and others for judgments made over a series of years. And so they still have that on their website. And the last thing I just want to add is that the information I discovered about the children that were abducted commencing in the 1970s, if you remember those milk cartons, remember that's when we started to see the missing children milk cartons show up all over the place?
I do remember that.
Yeah, so that happened because the Naval Department, who was now being funded privately, so the money came from initially it came from the gold that had been stolen by the Nazis from the Jewish people they murdered, right? So they were taking their jewelry, right? They were taking all of their belongings. That money, which I believe, and I could be wrong, $1 billion or $2 billion, amounted to approximately $50 billion. And they used that 50 billion commencing in 1974 to fund what we know now as the Montauk Project, which was a continuation of the MK Ultra experiments. Initially, it was just one location. It expanded over time to 25 locations throughout the United States. Each one of these locations was allocated. Think about that word, allocated. You can have 10,000 children, just take whoever you want. Us, American citizens, us, our children, us as children. And so they did. Each facility had the green light to go into the street or lure from their parents 10,000 children. That is a total of 250,000. That's 250,000 children that disappeared off the streets. In some cases, they were allowed to go back home, right? Because they would erase their memory, right? So deprogram them or whatever that's called, then let them go home. Like Jeffrey Epstein was allowed to go home, like Paul Bonacci was allowed to go home, right? Initially, he was allowed to go home before they just made him part of their group, right? And then home was with them. When this program went haywire in 1983-ish, the government said, we want nothing more to do with it. Oh, so then it was funded by private individuals. So that the head of, I almost want to say, I almost want to say, I don't want to say anything incorrect. So I'm just going to say that after that 50 billion with a B was gone on these 25 labs with 250,000 kids. And they weren't just looking at the MK Ultra, they were also doing time travel experiments. They were experimenting with age reversal, like the Brad Pitt movie.
Benjamin Button.
They were doing all sorts of experiments, telekinetics, so the movement of objects, or creating things from, you just think about it, they would have these rooms to train people how to do what Uri Geller did, but Uri Geller understated his ability so that, people wouldn't really freak out, right? So when something bad really happened, and what happened, I'll just say in closing, what happened was that the engineers and the people that were working on the project, on the Montauk project, became alarmed. They suddenly developed a social conscience, and they talked amongst themselves, and they said, we don't want to be part of this. And so they created a situation that spiraled out of control in order that the government would have to shut it down. And that's how it shut down, but it continues to present day in another format. But the Montauk Project shut down in 1983. The government sent in, again, this is very difficult because, these are human lives. This is not just something on a piece of paper. This is not a story. This is not on just a Netflix series. The government went in there, and all of the children that were left in these rooms, because then at the end, there were only 3 facilities, and then they shut them all down in 1983, the final 3, including the one in New York in Montauk. The government sent in their soldiers, and they were ordered to kill anyone who was alive. And that is how it ended.
Wow. And according to your timeline, this is around 1983. Is that correct?
That's when the Montauk Project was officially ended. But the Brookhaven one, where Epstein was then slipped into Dalton, ended in 1974, when he was then hired, surprise, surprise, by former OSS agent Donald Barr, who had already written his own science fiction sex slave book that the world knows about right?
That's correct. Now, I have just one final question.
Mhm.
Is there today any indication based on your research that the People's Republic of China is in any way involved with this research,
Yes,
funding it? Is that the source now? Because you said the money disappeared, it was exhausted. Who's funding it now? Is it China?
China is involved, but I can't get into that this conversation because that's in my other files, and I
Okay.
and I think we've been talking for 2.5 hours. I
I
can't believe
know.
it.
I'm sorry, Kirby, but
No, it's
please then let's wrap it up because we can go on and on. Where can the public, because
oh,
ladies and gentlemen, believe me, she has so much more in her books and you've got to read them. So please let's get that information out there, Miss
okay. So
Summers.
the information that I shared with you and our wonderful followers, because yours and mine are now kind of friends, can be found only through my website. Yes, you can find a lot of information in my memoir, The Billionaire's Woman, a lot of information in Ghislaine Maxwell, an unauthorized biography, and as Daryl Hamamoto has nicely uh, told you guys through Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy, this new information that connects Jeffrey Epstein to the early MK Ultra program can be found in two ways. I have a book that I put together from a series of newsletters that I wrote called Bill Barr, Leslie Wexner, and the CIA. And that can be found on my website, Kirby Sommers with an O. So KirbySommers.com. And you'll see a drop-down menu with my books. The information that I shared today is in Bill Barr, Leslie Wexner, and the CIA, which talks about covert operations. And it includes all of this information on the Philadelphia Project, the Montauk Project, Lolita, um, Gottlieb, all of these nefarious characters. And also, I have an ongoing, for 2.5 years, I've written a newsletter, which is the only reason I have so many books, is because for 2.5 years, every week, my newsletter, The Epstein Project, has original content that I send to subscribers. Now, granted, people do pay to get my newsletter, but at least they're paying to help me stay researching, because otherwise I would not be able to afford it. I'm not independently wealthy. I'm not wealthy at all. It is my followers that I thank profusely from the bottom of my heart, who have allowed me to continue my work. I have dedicated followers who have joined the Epstein Project newsletter. That again, there's a link to that on my website, and who support my work. Without them, I could not have done any of this. And so that is where that information for this program today can be found.
Wonderful. And ladies and gentlemen, yes, please do support Ms. Kirby Sommers. This is fresh, important information. For me, it's shed a lot of light on why we're in the situation, without going into the particulars, why we're in the desperate straits we're in today. This is important survival information. And my gosh, please keep supporting Ms. Kirby Sommers. Ms. Sommers, thank you very much for staying with us almost 3 hours. I apologize.
I want to
Yeah.
thank you for having me on, and I do want to apologize when I became a little emotional earlier. It's it's as you know, it's not like we're talking about we're human people, and we have emotions, and you and I are not psychopaths, and so
Yeah.
it's not easy sometimes to say this without feeling it. So I
Oh,
apologize
absolutely.
for that, but I thank you so much, and I thank I love your audience.
They are a
I love
quality audience.
they
I
really
really,
are.
yeah, I'm blessed as well. And thank you very much. We're only human beings, and really that's our salvation. That's how we will prevail, by just staying in touch with our humanity, which is love.
I agree. So thanks again. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. Thank you very much, Ms. Summers. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. Bye.